People like you always have an excuse. The sentence sliced through the afternoon like cold steel, and for a heartbeat the entire grocery store seemed to stop breathing. Shopping carts stood still. Barcode scanners fell silent. Even the soft country music drifting from the ceiling speakers suddenly felt distant beneath the weight of those words. Sarah Miller lowered her eyes, one hand gripping the handle of a worn shopping cart, while the other wrapped gently around her 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Inside the cart sat a gallon of milk, a loaf of wheat bread, a jar of peanut butter, a bottle of children's cough medicine, and a small box of oatmeal. Nothing more. Nothing extra. Just enough to survive another week. Her payment card flash declined across the register screen for the third time. Heat climbed into her cheeks as customers lined up behind her shifted impatiently. Some sighed. Others pretended not to notice. Lily tugged softly on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, are we going home?" she whispered, her tiny voice trembling with confusion instead of complaint. Sarah forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "Just give Mommy 1 minute, sweetheart." Store manager Bradley Kane folded his arms across his pressed white shirt and stared at Sarah with practiced indifference. His polished shoes reflected the bright fluorescent lights above while his name badge gleamed against his chest. "If you can't pay," he said loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear, "you're holding up everyone else." Sarah swallowed hard. "There has to be a mistake. I received confirmation this morning." Bradley shrugged without sympathy. "That's not my problem." A young cashier looked down at the register, clearly uncomfortable, but remained silent. No one challenged the manager. No one stepped forward. Near the entrance, a tall black man wearing faded jeans, work boots, and a charcoal hoodie quietly watched the exchange. A baseball cap shaded most of his face, making him look like any ordinary customer finishing errands after work. He carried only a small basket containing bottled water, bananas, and a package of coffee beans. He walked toward the checkout with calm, measured steps, his eyes never leaving Sarah or the frightened little girl standing beside her. Lily began coughing into her sleeve, her small shoulders shaking with each breath. Sarah immediately knelt beside her, brushing loose curls away from her daughter's forehead. "It's okay," she whispered softly. "We'll figure something out." The stranger noticed how Sarah comforted her daughter before thinking about herself. He noticed the carefully patched sleeve on Sarah's jacket, the frayed edges of her sneakers, and the exhaustion hidden behind eyes that hadn't known a full night's sleep in months. Then he noticed something else. Tucked inside Sarah's weathered wallet, barely visible beneath a faded family photo, was an old employee identification badge bearing the same company logo hanging above every aisle in the store. The name printed beneath the photo read, Sarah Miller. The stranger's expression changed almost imperceptibly. He stepped forward and placed his basket on the conveyor belt. "I'll cover her groceries," he said quietly. Bradley looked him up and down before letting out a short laugh. "That's generous," he replied with unmistakable sarcasm. "But judging by the way you're dressed, maybe you should worry about paying for your own first." The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he looked once more at Sarah's old employee badge, then slowly lifted his eyes to Bradley. And in that silent moment, something far bigger than a declined payment was about to come to light. Sarah lowered her head, unable to look anyone in the eye. She had promised herself years ago that no matter how difficult life became, Lily would never see her lose hope. But standing beneath the bright fluorescent lights with an empty bank balance and a line of strangers watching her every move tested every ounce of that promise. The little girl reached into the shopping cart and gently hugged the gallon of milk against her chest as though protecting the most valuable thing in the world. Caleb Whitmore noticed the gesture immediately. Children who felt safe never held groceries that way. They only did that when they had learned that even basic necessities could disappear. He quietly slid his wallet from his jacket pocket. Bradley folded his arms tighter and let out another dry laugh. "Sir, I already told her the transaction failed. There is nothing complicated about it." Caleb looked at him calmly. "Then let me pay." Bradley tilted his head with an expression that mixed amusement and quiet contempt. "You really want to spend your money fixing everybody else's problems?" Caleb answered without raising his voice. "Sometimes people do not need judgment. They need one person willing to help." Several customers exchanged uneasy glances. An elderly woman standing near the magazine rack smiled faintly, while a young father waiting behind Sarah shifted his basket from one hand to the other, clearly embarrassed by what he had witnessed. Sarah turned toward Caleb, her eyes already wet. "Thank you, sir, but I cannot accept that. My daughter has seen enough hard days. I do not want her believing strangers have to rescue us." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then let me consider it a neighbor helping another neighbor." Lily looked up at her mother. "Mom, he seems nice." Sarah forced another small smile before kneeling beside her daughter. "Kind people exist everywhere, sweetheart. We just have to remember that." Caleb watched the exchange in silence. There was no bitterness in Sarah's voice, no anger toward the store, no attempt to blame anyone. Only quiet dignity. It reminded him of someone he had known long before boardrooms, quarterly reports, and private flights became part of his life. His own mother had spoken the same way after working double shifts, and still finding time to remind him that character mattered more than money. His gaze drifted once again toward the faded employee badge inside Sarah's wallet. The plastic had yellowed with age, but the company logo remained unmistakable. He looked back at Bradley. "She worked here." Bradley shrugged carelessly. "Years ago. That has nothing to do with today." Sarah hesitated before answering herself. "I worked in this store for almost 4 years. I loved helping customers. I knew most of them by name." Her fingers tightened around the wallet. "I thought I would retire here one day." Caleb listened carefully. "What changed?" Sarah hesitated. For several long seconds, the soft hum of the refrigerators seemed louder than ever. Even the cashiers had stopped pretending not to listen. Finally, she inhaled slowly. "I reported something that I believed was wrong. After that, my schedule kept shrinking until there were no shifts left." Bradley immediately interrupted. "That is not how I remember it." Sarah looked down instead of arguing. Caleb noticed the pain on her face was not the pain of losing a job. It was the pain of losing faith in a place she had once called home. And somewhere deep inside him, a question began to grow that he could no longer ignore. Bradley forced a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "Every former employee has a story," he said, straightening the cuffs of his shirt. "Some simply refuse to accept responsibility for their own performance." Sarah did not answer. She had learned long ago that arguing with someone determined to rewrite the truth only exhausted the person already carrying the heavier burden. Instead, she gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from Lily's face. The little girl leaned against her mother's shoulder, still clutching the gallon of milk with both hands, as though letting go might somehow make it disappear. Caleb noticed every small movement. The fear in Lily was not dramatic. It was quiet, familiar. It was the kind of fear children carried after hearing adults whisper about overdue bills, missed paychecks, and impossible choices. Around them, the afternoon crowd had grown unusually silent. A teenager stocking canned vegetables slowed his cart. An elderly couple stopped beside the bakery display without pretending to shop anymore. Even the cashiers exchanged uncertain glances across their registers. Something about the scene no longer felt like a simple payment problem. Bradley stepped closer to the register. "If there is nothing else, I need this lane cleared." His voice remained polite on the surface, yet every word carried an unmistakable edge of dismissal. Caleb looked directly at him for the first time. "How long have you managed this location?" Bradley seemed surprised by the question. "Almost 5 years. And during those 5 years, Caleb continued calmly, how many employees have left?" Bradley shrugged. "Retail has turnover. That is normal." "How many filed complaints before leaving?" The question landed differently. Bradley hesitated for barely a second before recovering. "Human Resources handles paperwork. I run the store." Caleb nodded thoughtfully, but his eyes drifted across the sales floor instead. Shelves were neat. End-cap displays were perfectly arranged. Seasonal decorations hung with precise symmetry. On paper, the store looked successful. Yet something invisible felt wrong. Employees smiled only when customers looked directly at them. Conversations stopped whenever Bradley walked by. No one appeared relaxed. The atmosphere reminded Caleb of factories he had visited years earlier during difficult acquisitions, places where productivity existed without trust. Sarah quietly spoke, almost apologetically. "It was not always like this." Caleb turned toward her. "Tell me." She hesitated, searching for words that would not sound like bitterness. "When I started here, people celebrated birthdays in the break room. Managers knew our children's names. If someone became sick, coworkers covered each other's shifts without being asked. Customers came because they felt welcome." She looked around the store with gentle sadness. "Then people stopped smiling. Bradley laughed softly. You are describing nostalgia, not reality. Sarah shook her head. No, I am describing the difference between being managed and being valued. Those words lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Caleb watched several employees lower their eyes. One cashier quietly nodded before quickly pretending to organize receipts. Another worker stocking cereal tightened his grip on the cardboard box in his hands. No one spoke, yet their silence carried its own agreement. Caleb felt the pieces beginning to connect. This was never just about one declined payment, one former employee, or one difficult afternoon. Something had been slowly breaking inside this store for years, hidden beneath polished floors, clean shelves, and impressive sales reports. And if his instincts were correct, the truth waiting beneath the surface was far larger than Bradley Kane realized. Caleb reached into his pocket, removed a simple leather wallet, and placed a credit card gently on the counter. Please ring up every item, he said. His voice remained calm, almost effortless, yet something about it caused the young cashier to hesitate before looking toward Bradley for approval. Bradley did not even glance at the card. That will not be necessary, he replied. This customer has already delayed everyone long enough. Caleb rested one hand lightly on the shopping cart. She is no longer delaying anyone. I am paying. Bradley stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound polite, while making sure everyone nearby could still hear. Sir, this store has policies. We cannot encourage people to expect special treatment every time they come in with a story. Sarah immediately shook her head. Please do not argue because of me. Lily and I can leave. Lily looked up at her mother with frightened eyes. But Mommy, my medicine. The words were barely louder than a whisper, yet they seemed to echo through the front of the store. Caleb looked at the little girl and offered the gentlest smile he could manage. You are going home with your medicine today. Lily nodded slowly, trusting him without understanding why. Bradley exhaled sharply. You are creating a scene over groceries that cost less than $50. Caleb answered without changing his expression. No. The scene began long before I walked in. For the first time, Bradley's confidence flickered. He studied Caleb more carefully, searching for something he had overlooked. The worn boots, the faded hoodie, the weathered baseball cap. None of it suggested influence or authority. Yet the stranger spoke with a quiet certainty that refused to bend under pressure. Nearby, the elderly woman who had been watching since the beginning stepped forward. Young man, she said to Caleb, if you are helping them, I would like to buy the little girl some fruit. Before Caleb could answer, a father standing in the next checkout lane lifted a package of apples from his basket. Put these with mine, he said softly. Another customer added a box of cereal. Someone else offered yogurt. No speeches were made. No applause followed. One act of kindness simply invited another. Sarah covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes once again. Please, you do not have to do this. The elderly woman smiled warmly. Maybe we do. Caleb watched the customers with quiet gratitude. The store suddenly felt different. The cold tension that had filled the air only minutes earlier had begun to soften, replaced by something Bradley could not control. Community. Bradley quickly interrupted before the moment could grow any stronger. Everyone needs to return to shopping. This is still a business. Caleb slowly turned toward him. Exactly. He glanced once more around the sales floor, noticing employees watching from nearly every department. Faces that had looked anxious now carried something else. Hope. Very carefully, Caleb picked up Sarah's faded employee badge from the edge of the counter where it had slipped from her wallet. He brushed away a layer of dust with his thumb and quietly read the words beneath her photograph. Then he looked back at Bradley. Tell me something, he said. If this company once trusted her enough to wear this badge every day, what happened that made everyone else stop trusting her? Bradley opened his mouth to answer, but before a single word left his lips, a voice crackled over the store intercom calling for the assistant manager to report immediately to the front office because an unexpected corporate audit team had just arrived. The announcement over the intercom lasted only a few seconds, but its effect spread across the store like a sudden change in the weather. Employees exchanged nervous glances. Bradley's confident smile disappeared almost instantly before he forced it back into place. Corporate visits happen all the time, he said, adjusting his tie with hands that no longer looked completely steady. There is no reason for anyone to overreact. Caleb quietly slipped Sarah's old employee badge back into her wallet. You seem concerned for someone who says everything is under control. Bradley laughed, but the sound felt hollow. Concerned? Not at all. I simply prefer my staff to stay focused. Sarah lowered her eyes again. She had seen that expression before. Years earlier, every unexpected visit from regional leadership had transformed the store overnight. Broken equipment disappeared. Schedules suddenly became fair. Managers smiled more. Problems that employees had reported for months were hidden before anyone important could notice them. Then, once the visitors left, everything quietly returned to normal. Caleb studied the sales floor one aisle at a time. Fresh flowers near the entrance looked perfect. Produced displays were arranged with remarkable precision. Every shelf appeared fully stocked. It was the kind of presentation investors loved to see in quarterly reports. Yet none of it matched what he had observed in the faces of the people working there. Clean stores could be created in a few hours. Healthy workplace cultures took years. A young stock clerk slowly approached the checkout area, pushing a cart filled with bottled water. He looked toward Bradley, hesitated, then looked at Caleb instead. "Sir," he said softly, "would you mind if I—" His voice faded before he finished the sentence. Bradley answered for him. "Back to your department, Ethan." The young employee immediately nodded and turned away without another word. Caleb noticed the disappointment in the young man's posture. It reminded him of countless talented employees who had stopped sharing ideas simply because they believed nobody wanted to hear them. Lily gently tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Mom, why is everybody so quiet?" Sarah brushed her daughter's hair behind one ear and smiled with remarkable tenderness despite everything that had happened. Sometimes people are waiting to see if someone will do the right thing. Caleb heard every word. They stayed with him longer than he expected. He had spent years studying numbers, supply chains, and expansion plans, but moments like this reminded him that leadership could never be measured entirely on spreadsheets. It lived in ordinary conversations between ordinary people. Suddenly, the front entrance opened again. 3 professionally dressed men and a woman carrying tablets walked into the store wearing visitor badges with the Whitmore Market corporate logo. Several department supervisors immediately straightened their uniforms. Bradley quickly stepped forward wearing his brightest customer service smile. "Welcome to Store 27, he called confidently. "We are honored to have you here today." The woman leading the group smiled politely, but did not shake his hand. Instead, her attention drifted toward the unusually large crowd gathered around the checkout lanes. She noticed Sarah holding back tears, Lily clutching the milk, customers standing silently instead of shopping, and one man in a faded hoodie watching everything with complete composure. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She recognized him immediately, but she said nothing. Instead, she lowered her tablet slightly, gave the smallest respectful nod in his direction, and waited. Caleb returned the gesture with a nearly invisible glance that clearly asked her to remain silent. Bradley never noticed the exchange. He continued enthusiastically explaining sales numbers and operational achievements, completely unaware that the person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's had been standing only a few feet away from him all along, quietly listening to every word since the moment Sarah's payment had been declined. The woman from corporate took one slow step forward, her polished shoes making almost no sound against the spotless tile floor. She continued looking at Caleb for another brief moment before shifting her attention toward Sarah. "Ma'am," she asked gently, "would you mind telling us what happened here today?" Before Sarah could answer, Bradley spoke first. "It is a simple misunderstanding. A payment issue that one customer decided to exaggerate." Caleb remained completely silent. His hands rested loosely on the shopping cart as though he had nowhere else to be. The silence itself became uncomfortable. Sarah looked from the corporate visitors to Lily, then back toward the checkout counter. "I never wanted attention," she said quietly. "I only wanted to buy food and medicine for my daughter." Her voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. The woman nodded. "Please continue." Sarah took a slow breath. "Years ago, I loved working here. I believed this company cared about people. I believed if something unfair happened, speaking up was the right thing to do. I still believe that." The fluorescent lights reflected softly across the polished floor while the steady hum of refrigerated cases filled the spaces between her words. No customer interrupted. No employee looked away. It was as though the entire store understood that something more important than groceries was happening. Sarah carefully removed the faded employee badge from her wallet and held it in both hands. The edges had become worn from years of being carried everywhere she went. I kept this because I was proud to work here, she admitted. Even after I lost my job, I could not bring myself to throw it away. Lily looked up with innocent curiosity. Mom, why did you keep it if it made you sad? Sarah smiled through moist eyes. Because it also reminds me that I was once part of something good. Caleb lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Those words landed deeper than any financial report he had ever read. Buildings could be renovated. Stores could be expanded. Technology could be upgraded. But when someone still carried pride after being disappointed, that was something money could never purchase. The woman from corporate slowly accepted the badge from Sarah and examined it. Employee of the month, she read softly. 3 consecutive quarters. Several employees exchanged surprised glances. A cashier whispered almost unconsciously, I remember her. Customers always waited for her lane. Another employee nodded. She trained half of us. Bradley immediately interrupted. Past performance has nothing to do with current business needs. The words echoed awkwardly through the checkout area. This time no one seemed convinced. Even the assistant managers standing near the entrance remained unusually quiet. Caleb finally lifted his eyes and looked around the store once more. He noticed the tired expressions hidden behind polite smiles. He noticed employees instinctively watching Bradley before speaking. He noticed customers offering silent encouragement to Sarah without expecting recognition. Every small detail painted the same picture. Numbers might say the store was succeeding, but trust had quietly disappeared. The woman from corporate handed the badge back to Sarah with both hands, almost respectfully. Thank you for keeping this, she said. Sometimes the smallest things preserve the biggest truths. Sarah carefully slipped it back into her wallet beside the family photograph. Caleb watched the gesture in complete silence. He no longer needed instincts alone. The answers were beginning to reveal themselves naturally, one quiet voice after another. Then the woman from corporate received a notification on her tablet. She looked down, read only a few lines, and her expression changed completely. Without saying another word, she slowly turned the screen toward Caleb, revealing a confidential employee report that had not been opened in nearly 4 years, and the first name listed beneath the heading made the air inside the store feel suddenly heavier than before. Sarah Miller. The checkout area fell into complete silence as Caleb accepted the tablet without a word. He read the first page slowly, then the second. Every line confirmed what he had begun to suspect. 4 years earlier, Sarah Miller had submitted a formal complaint describing repeated incidents of employees being treated differently, schedules being manipulated, and concerns disappearing before reaching senior leadership. The file had been marked for review, but another notation caught his attention. Investigation closed. Insufficient evidence. Caleb lifted his eyes from the screen and calmly asked, Who closed this case? The corporate representative touched the display once more. Another page appeared. The approving manager's signature was missing, replaced by an administrative override that had never been explained. Bradley shifted his weight uneasily. There were staffing changes back then. Old records are often incomplete. Caleb continued reading. Attached to Sarah's complaint were statements from 3 additional employees. One had resigned within weeks. One had transferred to another state. One had simply disappeared from the company database. None of their interviews had ever been completed. Caleb looked toward the employees gathered nearby. Does anyone here remember them? No one answered immediately. Then the young cashier slowly raised her hand. I trained with one of them, she said quietly. She used to tell me to always treat customers like neighbors. Another employee nodded. I remember another one. He suddenly stopped coming to work. We were told he found a better opportunity. The assistant manager frowned as she looked at the records. According to this file, he requested an internal investigation before leaving. Bradley quickly stepped forward. With respect, these documents are years old. They have nothing to do with today's situation. Caleb finally looked directly at him. His expression remained calm, but there was unmistakable disappointment in his eyes. Everything has to do with today? Culture does not collapse in one afternoon. It erodes one ignored decision at a time. The words settled over the store with quiet weight. Sarah held Lily's hand a little tighter, unsure what would happen next. She had spent years believing her voice had disappeared into a filing cabinet that nobody would ever open again. Now strangers were reading the very pages she thought had been forgotten forever. Caleb handed the tablet back to the corporate representative. Please access employee retention reports for this location over the past 5 years, along with every unresolved complaint and every schedule adjustment involving these names. The representative nodded immediately. Already processing, sir. Bradley blinked. Sir? He repeated almost instinctively, looking from the representative back to the man in the faded hoodie. The corporate team exchanged brief glances before instinctively stepping half a pace behind Caleb instead of beside Bradley. The movement was subtle, but impossible to miss. Customers noticed it. Employees noticed it. Even Lily looked curiously at the adults surrounding the quiet stranger. Bradley's confident posture slowly faded. For the first time since the confrontation began, uncertainty replaced authority. He searched Caleb's face as though trying to remember where he had seen him before. Caleb reached up calmly, removed his weathered baseball cap, and slipped it into the shopping basket. Then he looked around the store one final time before speaking in the same steady voice he had used from the beginning. My name is Caleb Whitmore. The corporate representatives immediately straightened. And before anyone else says another word, Caleb continued. I believe every person in this store deserves to know exactly why I came here today. No one moved. The humming refrigerators, the distant beeping registers, even the automatic doors opening and closing at the entrance seemed to fade into the background. Caleb Whitmore stood quietly in the middle of the checkout lane, holding nothing except his faded baseball cap. I came here today because I wanted to see this store the way our customers see it, he said. No advance notice. No prepared reports. No special treatment. Just the truth. A wave of disbelief swept across the employees. Bradley's lips parted, but no words came out. The woman from corporate stepped beside Caleb and spoke with calm professionalism. Mr. Whitmore is the founder and chief executive officer of Whitmore Market. Several employees instinctively straightened their posture. The young cashier covered her mouth in shock. The elderly customer who had offered to buy fruit for Lily smiled gently, as though she had expected kindness to reveal something extraordinary all along. Bradley swallowed hard. Sir, if I had known. Caleb interrupted softly. That is exactly the point. You should not have needed to know. His words carried no anger. They carried disappointment. Every customer deserves dignity. Every employee deserves respect. Those principles do not depend on who is watching. Bradley lowered his eyes. For the first time since the afternoon began, the polished confidence that had defined him disappeared completely. Caleb turned toward Sarah. Miss Miller, I owe you an apology. Sarah immediately shook her head. You do not owe me anything. You were not here when everything happened. Caleb answered gently. Leadership does not disappear simply because the leader is somewhere else. If someone carrying my company badge lost faith in this company, then I have a responsibility to. Listen. Sarah looked down at the faded employee badge resting in her hand. She had imagined this conversation 100 different ways over the years. None of them had looked like this. Caleb continued. Your complaint should have been heard. Your work should have been respected. And your daughter should never have watched her mother feel embarrassed while trying to buy food. Lily looked up at Caleb with innocent curiosity. Does that mean Mommy did not do anything wrong? Caleb knelt until he was at eye level with her. A warm smile softened his face. Your mother did something very brave. She chose honesty, even when it was difficult. Companies become stronger because of people like her. Lily smiled for the first time that afternoon and wrapped both arms around her mother's waist. Around them, several employees quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Caleb rose to his feet and turned toward the corporate team. Effective immediately, I want every complaint connected to this location reopened by an independent review team. Every employee who left after filing concerns deserves to be contacted personally. I also want anonymous interviews with every current associate before this week ends. The corporate representatives nodded without hesitation, already entering notes into their tablets. Caleb then looked back at Sarah. If you are willing, I would like to offer you the opportunity to return. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because this store needs people whose character has already been tested. Sarah stood speechless. Before she could answer, the corporate representative received another notification. She studied the new report for several seconds, then slowly looked up at Caleb. Sir, she said quietly, the investigation has uncovered something none of us expected. This issue did not begin at this store. It may involve multiple locations across the company. The words from the corporate representative settled over the store with quiet gravity, but Caleb did not allow the moment to become one of fear. Instead, he nodded calmly. Then we will fix every location, one truth at a time. He turned back to Sarah, whose eyes still reflected disbelief more than relief. Years of disappointment could not disappear in a single afternoon. Trust returned slowly, built through actions instead of promises. Caleb looked toward the employees gathered around the checkout lanes. Every company talks about values, he said. Real values are revealed when nobody important appears to be watching. His gaze moved across the familiar aisles lined with neatly arranged products. Today, I did not find a problem with inventory. I found a problem with courage. Too many good people stopped believing their voices mattered. The words lingered in the still air. The young cashier stepped forward first. I should have spoken up earlier, she admitted softly. Another employee nodded. So should I. One by one, others quietly agreed. No one blamed anyone else. No one argued. They simply acknowledged what had been left unsaid for far too long. Caleb smiled gently. That is where rebuilding begins. He then turned toward Bradley, whose shoulders had slumped beneath the weight of the afternoon. Bradley took a slow breath before speaking. I spent so much time protecting my position that I forgot my responsibility. He looked at Sarah with genuine regret. I cannot undo the years you lost, but I am truly sorry for the way you were treated. Sarah remained silent for several seconds before answering. An apology matters when it is followed by change. Caleb nodded with quiet approval. Exactly. He instructed the corporate team to begin an independent review across every Whitmore Market location, establish a confidential employee advocacy office reporting directly to headquarters, and require leadership training focused on dignity, fairness, and accountability. Then he looked back at Sarah. My offer still stands. I would like you to return as employee experience supervisor. Your job will not be to manage shelves. Your job will be to make sure every associate who walks through these doors feels seen, respected, and heard. Tears filled Sarah's eyes once again, but this time they carried something different. Hope. She looked down at Lily, who smiled brightly and whispered, Mom, you get to help people now. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. Yes, sweetheart, that is exactly what I want to do. Caleb picked up the gallon of milk and the bottle of medicine, placed them gently into reusable shopping bags, and handed them to Sarah without ceremony. There were no cameras, no applause, only a simple act of respect. As Sarah and Lily walked toward the front entrance, the afternoon sunlight poured through the glass doors, casting long golden reflections across the polished floor. Several employees smiled naturally for the first time that day. Customers quietly stepped aside to let the mother and daughter pass. Lily looked back one last time and waved. Caleb returned the wave with a warm smile before lifting his eyes toward the large Whitmore Market sign hanging above the entrance. It suddenly seemed to carry a deeper meaning than it had that morning. A business could sell groceries in every neighborhood across America, but its greatest product would always be the dignity it offered the people who entered its doors. As the automatic doors closed behind Sarah and Lily, the store became quiet once more, not with tension, but with peace. And in that gentle silence, everyone present understood the same truth. Kindness had never been weakness. It had been the strongest form of leadership all along.